I think all commissioners are in person, so all JFAC members as of this moment are participating here in person. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics on how tonight's meeting will be run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the JFAC website. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For commissioners who are joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I will address when it is appropriate to turn it on in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat should only be used for participants who need technical assistance and for members of the public who request to speak during the public comment period. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public comment periods. Additional notes for JFAC members: if commissioners participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn on your video feed and raise the virtual hand in Teams. Emily monitors the video feeds that are an indicator of who would like to speak. Do we have any commission members who joined us via phone today with or without the video option?
There's nobody.
Okay, there's nobody online. Additional notes for our members of the public who would like to provide feedback and comment: we will hold public comment periods at the beginning and end of the meeting. Those requesting to speak may do so during only one comment period and will be allotted up to 3 minutes to speak on tonight's agenda items. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has concluded. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. I am Stacy Snyder. I am the chair. Willis Harrell is our vice chair. I'd like to introduce Emily Garrett, who will be our new county board staff liaison, and we must give a farewell and express a sincere gratitude to Matt Ladd, who is our outgoing county board liaison and who's here for his last meeting. Thank you for all you've done, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
And, welcome to Emily.
Thank you.
The chair's update. I wanted to just point out that it was February the 5th. I attended the Arlington 2050 kickoff event that is being organized by the Garvey and the county board, and it is really a visioning. I think it's very relevant to JFAC's charge, and it's also kind of something that we recommended with our missing middle recommendations last year, because based on our research, a lot of the jurisdictions that we studied, or almost all of them, had also adopted missing middle as part of this long-range visioning process. So it was very interesting. There was a panel discussion. I will share there's a YouTube video that you can watch. There's a demographer that spoke about kind of what Arlington population will look like in 2050, and Jason Samanel from the Washington Post talked about what climate might look like in 2050, and someone from Amazon spoke, and someone from George Mason University talked about future of kind of what education might look like in 2050. But I thought it was really interesting. one of the things the demographer said was, well, I'll just say, when, I think it's a really interesting and will be a very valuable initiative. When Libby Garvey introduced it, she said, she used a Yogi Berra quote, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. So it's a visioning process that will then, kind of hopefully put planning processes into place that will hopefully be collaborative, incorporate this long range visioning that will make changes. And I watched it again, I was there live, but I watched the YouTube video this morning and the sound was not.
But you watched it a second time?
I did, well, yeah, because I wanted to go back and because there was so much information that both I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched the demographer because we are getting projections tonight. But he said that Arlington has shown in the past that it has a capacity to make some serious adaptations to changes. And that was like for bringing in Metro. And said it did this with the Metro. I think in the next couple of decades, it's going to have to make changes on a scale that it did successfully in the past. Because, anyway, I will let you guys present the projections. I will introduce you in a second, but I will share over email the YouTube link, and there's also a link that you can create a postcard that says, it's a postcard from the future. Like, here I am in Arlington, it's 2050, and Arlington is a great place to live because it has done all of these things, and here we are. So you can do that, and hopefully at some point, we as a JFAC can contribute something to that visioning process as well. Okay, so we'll move on to, do we have any public commenters? Have anybody online?
No.
Nobody's joined online yet? Interesting. Okay. All right. So let's just move on to our update on projections and forecasts. I guess, Robert, you're up first.
Yep. So Robert Ruiz with Planning and Evaluation. So Matt, if you don't mind starting the slides. Great, thank you. So next slide, please. So I'll cover context on the recent enrollment projections and the factors which inform the projections. And then we'll review the actual figures for that projections. And then afterwards, Elizabeth and Nicole will present on county demographics. So next slide, please. Next. So at APS, there are 4 different types of figures that inform next school year's enrollment. So planning and evaluation projections is just one. So those 4 sources include secondary special education and maximum pre-K special education, and that comes from the Offices of Special Education in the Chief Academics Officer's office. Then there's also the maximum pre-K allocations, and those come from the Chief Academic Officer as well. There's also English learners. That also comes from the Office of Chief Academic Officer. And there's also, and the 4th source for enrollment data is overall K-12 projections by school that comes out of planning and evaluation. So again, 4 sources of enrollment information that inform budgets and staffing and whatnot. So next slide, please. So who are some of the stakeholders that use projections, at least within APS? Um, so projections are produced independent from other APS processes. So you can think of them as agnostic in terms of they don't tell you a route. They just inform you on these are the factors that are, these are the enrollment and where we think enrollment is likely to go in the future. And so it's one of many data points which inform decision makers. So some of the key decision makers within APS would include budget and finance, so how to determine the budget funds and positions per school for the upcoming fiscal year. There's also human resources, which determines the number of school instructors and support staff to hire by school. And there's also offices like, for example, facilities and operations who use those projections as background information to inform the capital improvement plan process. So next slide, please. So what is a projection? So a projection is not a forecast. So forecasts rely on assumptions about future events, such as a recession or interest rate spike. So you're making an assumption about something happening in the future. The K to 12 enrollment projections look at recent enrollment trends and extend them forward into the future. So it's like looking in the rear view mirror. So one of the risks of that approach is that trends will abruptly change course. For example, the pandemic, which we all lived through recently, a recession can change how households behave and enroll their students. Extreme weather events is something that we're cognizant that could have impacts in the future. So, but on the plus side, the expectations from projections can be explained by citing past trends. So actual facts that we all agree on. So next slide, please. So this chart shows sort of a long range view of enrollment at Arlington Public Schools going back to the 1960s. And you can see that with our enrollment, there's been fluctuations over time. Since about 2007 or 2006, an interesting thing about our APS enrollment is that it was growing consistently year over year. So consistently growing year over year up until just before the pandemic hit on 2019. And 2019 really marks our sort of high point for enrollment at 26,906 K-12 students. Since then, because again, many of the decisions that families made and how they enroll their students at APS, enrollment has fluctuated. So, we've had periods of it going down since then, going up, and most recently being really flat. But I think an interesting thing about looking at the change from 2019 to the latest enrollment count is that it's not a uniform picture. It also varies by school level. So at the elementary level, from that period from 2019 to September of 2023, we lost K-5 enrollment. We lost middle school enrollment as well. But we also had a net gain just in the count of high school students between 2019 and 2023. So it's a more nuanced picture. So next slide, please. So this is a slide I think I showed last year. So I updated it with more recent information from 2022 to 2023. So the interesting thing about this slide is just to look at some of the growth. So the bars on this chart show net changes in enrollment year over year. And the orange line is percent change year over year. And I think looking at percent change might be more informative. But what you can see is that since about 2013, 2014 period, APS was growing and growth was positive, but that rate of growth was slowing down. So we went from around 3.6% down to almost 2% by the period of fall 2018 to fall 2019. And of course, the pandemic just changed everything. So there was again, families making decisions on how they enroll their students. And so we had an abrupt, drop in enrollment. The following school year, there was also a drop in enrollment, but to a lesser extent. Between 21 and 22, we had some positive growth of 1.7%. But between fall 22 and 23, the most recent sort of trend, it's really, I would say, flat at 0.4% growth. So you can see that at least recent K-12 trends have been mixed. So we've had declines, growth, and then flatlining. Next slide, please. So Arlington Public Schools was not alone in this. There were other school systems that also had similar, flat enrollment, such as Fairfax County Public Schools, Montgomery County, Prince George's. Within the region around DC, notable exceptions were Alexandria City Public Schools, which did see an uptick, and as well as the District of Columbia. But for the most part, some of the inner schools, school systems closest to the DC metro area had they were flat. And then some school systems further out, like Prince William, Loudoun, Richmond Public Schools had declines. Next slide, please. So one way of looking at growth is through a concept that is called kindergarten replacement. So kindergarten replacement is the difference between the number of incoming K students. So for example, incoming K students September 30th of 2023, and the number of grade 12 students the prior year. So grade 12 students for the prior school year. As you can see, for around the period between 2008 to 2019, that kindergarten replacement averaged around 650 students. But since 2020, that replacement from 2020 to 2022 averaged around 170. And when comparing our incoming K students September of this school year versus the grade 12 students the prior school year, it actually went negative. So that's something that we'll be monitoring and keeping an eye on, just because a positive number, as you all saw earlier in the decade, a positive number, is indicative of future enrollment growth when that replacement is positive. But a negative number, replacement number, could suggest potential declines or stagnation in enrollment. So we'll see. So that's one measure that we have to monitor. Next slide, please. So another thing that for background information on projections is births. And this is a slide that I also showed last year to JFAC, but I updated with more recent numbers. So, 2016, at least going back to 2010, 2016 was sort of a high point for the number of births to Arlington parents. But since then, those number of births to Arlington parents have been declining over time. So the most recent actual number is for 2022 at 2,415 births. Elizabeth and Nicole provide APS with a forecast of births, and those for this projections round, they go down slightly post 2022, but then increase over time. This is different than the forecast from last year, which was more defined as just being, negative or declining over time. So of course, births are indicative of future incoming kindergarten cohorts 5 years later, and so it does have an impact on the enrollment projections.
Can I ask a question throughout, or do you want to wait at the end?
Do you want to, why don't we wait? So next slide, please. So another informative indicator of, what's happening with our enrollment is something called birth to kindergarten ratios. So it's a admittedly a crude ratio. It looks at the number of births 1 year and then the number of incoming kindergarten students 5 years later. It doesn't, so you can think of it as a capture rate, although by no means is it saying, oh, 70% of those births actually are now enrolled at APS. It's just it's a way of measuring and over time and looking at a trend. But, those incoming K students might be from born outside of Arlington. And at the same time, those children born in Arlington also go elsewhere. So, but it's indicative though of migration. So pre-pandemic, if you look at, for example, the period of 2017, the period from 2017 to 2019 in terms of school year, that measure was around 70% or 71%. So in a crude way saying around 71% of those births are now enrolling at APS. Of course, it's not the same children, but it's a measure. But the 3-year average post-pandemic has gone down to around 66%. And that might be indicating something like parents, households with children migrating out. And so we're keeping less of those households in Arlington than traditionally. And as you can see earlier in the decade, some of those rates were higher, well above 75%. Next slide, please. Just want to mention a study that I'll be participating in the spring at looking at how students enroll in new buildings that are constructed. One thing that I did notice by looking at some of the recently completed buildings was there was an expectation of how many students would be residing in those buildings. And for some of those buildings, that the number of students are not as high as we expected. Some of that is related to, might be construction, so some buildings that were anticipated to be finished in time to, have enrollment for this current school year. They've been, some of them have been delayed. Other times it's that they did open within a range of they were expected, but not early enough for them to be fully occupied. And in some cases, we need to understand why they didn't fill up as much as we expected. So that's something that, hopefully next year I can present on those findings. Next slide, please. So looking at the actual projections. Next slide, please. So this chart comes from the enrollment projections report. So it just shows the trajectory post 2023 from 2024 to 2033 in terms of the enrollment that we expect. And as you can see, it's not a pronounced increase, but it is positive, at least in that 10-year time span. Another thing to note is that if you look at the bar, so the way to read this bar chart is the gray bars are actual pre-K and K-12 enrollment. Now, when you get to projections, at the very bottom of those bars in orange is the pre-K budgeted pre-K assignments that I mentioned earlier. Those stay constant over time. They don't change. What does change are the blue bars, and that's the K-12 enrollment projections. So next slide, please. So these are the numbers, looking at September 30th, 2023. So actual enrollment that APS experienced, and then what is being projected for next school year, fall 2024, and 2028, and then 2033, so 10 years out. Next slide, please. So more informative is looking at the percentage change. So from 2023 to 2024, elementary projection is expected to increase by 0.5%, so K-5 enrollment. Middle school, grade 6 to 8, it's expected to grow by 2.4%, and high school by 1.5%. So in total, K-12, 1.2%. Now, pre-K enrollment is budgeted to increase by around 2.4%. Change 34%. So total pre-K to 12, when you combine the two, projected numbers and those budgeted pre-K seats, 2.4%. Now, from 2023 to 2028, 5 years out, you can see that K to 12 enrollment is expected to grow by 1.6%. Elementary enrollment declines slightly, but you can see that high school enrollment grows by 4.9%, so, and middle school by 3.7%. So it offsets that decline at elementary for an overall K to 12 enrollment growth of 1.6%. And then when you take pre-K in total, it combined included, it increases by 2.7%. And then 10 years out, K to 12 enrollment is expected to grow, from 2023 to 2033, so a full 10-year time span by 4.1%. And when you take pre-K into account, it's 5.1%. But, caution must be used with those long-term projections. And next slide, please. So this graphic also comes from the enrollment projections report, and I'll walk you through it just to illustrate why caution, needs to be taken into account when looking at long-term projections. So on this graphic, the top line for 2023, imagine that all of those dots are actual students enrolled at APS. When I look at the 2024 projection, assumptions need to be made about that incoming K cohort based on births, on actual births. Now that K student in 2023 moves to grade 1, grade 4 to grade 5, and so on. By 2025, 2 of those cohorts, so if you look at the light blue, 2 of those cohorts now are based off of assumptions on birth plus construction. So out of the 6 cohorts at elementary, when you count K in, so 2 are based off of relying on that data set. And only 4 are based on, actual student counts. So by the time that you get to, for example, 2028, 6 years out, or 5 years out, then 5 of those cohorts are based off of assumptions about that future construction and future births, and that all gets modeled. So by 2029, all those elementary cohorts are based off of those assumptions that go into the projections. So that's why I always say do exercise some degree of caution when looking at the long term, especially at the elementary level. Once you get enough years out, but also at the middle school and even the high school level once you get to a certain point in time, because those same assumptions will ripple through all the other cohorts. Next slide, please. So this chart just shows some of the enrollment projections over time. And as you can see, how I started the presentation, you're always looking backwards. You're always looking at what recently occurred to think about what the future could look like. So some of our earlier projections going back to 2013, 2014 were quite robust because what was in the rearview mirror then was this, very robust growth in enrollment. Recently, with the fall 2023 and the fall 2022 projections, you can see that, and even the fall 2021 projections, you can see that the at least what we're seeing in the rearview mirror in the recent past, that narrative is different, and so those assumptions, those factors that go into the projections are different, and so it's not as robust as it was before. Next slide, please. So one thing that's included in the enrollment projections report is accuracy. And so that's, see if it's listed there. So in attachment E of the projections report, you will find accuracy information for every school going back several projections rounds so that you can see, how well are we doing with those enrollment projections. So for when comparing September 30th, 2023 to the fall projections of fall 2020, the fall projections on the prior year for that school year, the actuals came in lower than had been projected by around 400 students, K to 12. But, in terms of the accuracy, it was 99%. It was better at the middle school level and at 98% for the elementary and high school level. And so in other words, that flatlining that we saw between fall 22 and fall 2023 is not something that we picked up on based on some of the prior data. And then you can see figures for pre-K. Next slide, please. So this infographic is hard to read, but what it's trying to explain is sort of the cycle on how projections work with human resources and with budget and finance. So right now, the superintendent will release a budget. That budget is based off of the fall projections that are included in the projections report. Currently, I'm working on what is called the spring update to the next school year's projections. That will take in some other factors into account, and those projections will then inform the school board's proposed budget and the adopted budget. So it's a complex process that includes many APS stakeholders at different points in time. And then an earlier version of that infographic is also included in the enrollment projections report. Next slide, please. So some takeaways, enrollment reached a high point in 2019, and fall 2023 enrollment is below that peak. APS experienced flat K-12 enrollment growth between 2022 and 2023, but we were not, APS was not alone in that, and other Northern Virginia school systems also experienced that. And importantly, enrollment trends are not yet telling a consistent narrative. So enrollment trends have been mixed with declines, growth, and then flattening. The fall 2023 projections expect K-12 enrollment to grow by 1.2% between 2023 and 2024, when budgeted pre-K seats or budgeted pre-K enrollment is included, that growth bumps to 2.4%. And as with anything else, there are risks. And for the fall 2023 projections, those include, they mentioned earlier, newly open residential buildings taking longer to reach occupancy, and in some cases, those buildings taking longer to get built. The share of 2019 birth becoming incoming kindergarten students falling further than anticipated. Again, that birth to kindergarten ratio has been declining slightly. And an outsized external event outside APS's control, such as a recession, pandemic, changes in immigration policy, extreme weather events. So there are those. Next slide, please. So next up is the demographics update.
Can I ask questions before we
Sure.
to the county side? Could you go back to slide 15? I think that was the one.
It's page 15, yes.
Yeah. Could you explain why the bottom number, the pre-K enrollment, I understand it's just a placeholder, and so you have the same number 1235 across all of it, but
Mhm.
why 1235?
That's so.
The previous one was 919 or
Yes.
916 or 919.
So.
Yeah.
So the Office of Early Childhood in the Chief's Academic Officers, office, they determine the pre-K the pre-K and budgeted pre-K enrollment by school.
Okay.
And so that's independent of the projections. So I'm not an expert on how they make those decisions, but I know that in the, for example, in the enrollment projections report, you have in the, like, literally, one of the things we do is we'll include the projected K-12 enrollment. On this side, we'll include the budgeted pre-K seats, and that's determined by that office.
I mean, the governor put a budget out that was going to, I think, cut pre-K funding in half.
I was gonna ask about that.
So like, how valid are those numbers?
Yeah.
I mean, we can, I'm hoping that at our
Because I
March
think a lot's
meeting,
based on
we
that
can-
number, right?
we can take questions like this and see if we can get answers from the other APS staff that Robert,
Yeah.
Robert works in planning and evaluation. He does this report. And so I think, we can make a note of these questions, and because I have a question about that pre-K too, because you see, and this sort of goes into the larger question that, does anybody, is it okay if I ask a question?
I have some more.
So I think that, like when this projections report came out, it took me a little while to kind of wrap my head around it. Sort of looking at it compared to last year's projections. And last year's projections, they're visual graphs in the pre-CIP report that show, the enrollment projections relative to design capacity seats. And so I think for me, it was a little bit confusing reading that, okay, there's growth, but that's growth from, relative to design capacity seats that APS has. Like if you look at a capacity, if you entered all of those numbers into a design, capacity utilization chart, at least even based on the numbers that are based on actual births and not really on assumptions, by 2028, we're looking at a surplus of, we're still looking at a surplus of seats at every school level. By 2033, even if we grow, we're still looking at a surplus of seats at every level. And even though that last number, the 28,865, if I'm reading that correctly, is actually a little bit higher. You know, the total pre-K through 12 is a little bit higher than the 2019 number where we reached our peak at 28,020. APS added approximately 1,600 new seats in between 2019 and 2021. Those projects were finished. They were planned before we saw the, kind of the decline in birth rate and the pandemic. And so that was the Cardinal and the Ed Center, and some new seats were created at the Career Center, the second floor of the library. And so, can you confirm that?
What I can say is that on the APS website, on the statistics, about us statistics, I do publish something called the capacity utilization tables. So the version I have is the one that we currently have there. It has not been updated, partially because the spring update is included, so that needs to be finished before those numbers are updated. What I can say is from you can look at the capacity utilization tables. They're online, and so you can see the difference between projected enrollment and expected seats if there's any new construction, and some our design capacity. So that's available data. That's online, and to your point, it was also included in that pre-CIP report as visuals.
Claire, I actually have a question relating to yours on pre-K, that's all right?
Sure.
Yeah, me too.
So it looks like on one of the other slides, there was like 300 some odd student difference between projected pre-K, sitting in fall 22, looking forward to 23, and then going forward to fall 23, it was 300 some odd higher than what had been projected. Could you explain the reason for that? Like, is it that the pre-K cap was raised for 23 and those enrollments filled? Or was it that the cap was actually the same or substantially the same?
So
and there's just more growth
I
in
can't
pre-K?
speak in an informed way about pre-K, not being an expert on it, and I know it's a very complex staffing work that's undertaken for pre-K. So I can't make it, give it justice like for all the work that's involved with it. I mean, I can include it in questions because it seems that there's a lot of questions around how is pre-K how is budgeted pre-K determined, in other words.
Well, that does go towards pre-K through 12 design capacity seats, and if you actually, can we go back to the bar graph, the gray and the blue? Yeah, that one. It looks like pre-K hasn't hit that 1,235 since 2018.
Yeah, and one thing to note for that slide that I had, like, right, 4 sources of enrollment information.
Right. Yeah.
One thing is that it's the maximum pre-K allocations that do occur.
Yeah.
But again, I know it's very complicated, and I can't speak to it in an informed way, not being a pre-K expert.
Yeah.
I have one clarifying thing that you were asking about. I wrote down is what are the budgeted pre-K numbers? What is that? What programs or budget? Where does that come from? What does it mean? Like a VPK or other programs? Like where is that?
Yeah, so that would
assume
that would include VPI, pre-K special education, 3- and 4-year-old Montessori, community peers. So there's several types of pre-K that are in that
But
that figure.
a budgeted allocation makes it sound like we will plan to have these seats available. That is different than reverse mirror looking. So you're
Yeah.
kind of conflating some things here. You're saying that this is a projection, and then we're putting in a pretty key piece that is not a projection.
So,
Or it, like how,
so that
Yeah,
looking at
the
the
rear
rear
view
view mirror only applies to K to 12. So
yeah,
only-
but that's not, I mean,
but
but
in-
if we're using what is, I guess, it's not, and it's not, it doesn't sound like it's even a forecast either. So you've got the forecasts where people are trying to predict the future based on, whatever's been happening. You've got the projections where you just take the trend and continue it. And then you've got this whole other third category that's the preschool, budgeted preschool seats or whatever. But that seems to be driving a whole lot.
Well, the reason it's included is because part of APS, besides K to 12, also includes pre-K. So to get the full picture of enrollment at APS, you do have to look at pre-K. But, different data
But
sources.
looking at it, I mean, I don't.
Different data sources have different, different things go into it. So for K to 12 enrollment, it's projected. Pre-K, again, it's still maximum budgeted pre-K seats, but in some.
But I'd want to know, because you could look at births and you could say, what is the latest kindergarten, like birth to K ratio? And you could say 3 years ago,
Yeah.
there were 1,900 births times 0.64 is the current ratio. That should generate an actual projection for
Yeah.
pre-K, not this other number that we don't know where it's coming from. We could actually put that input into this model.
I mean, I think this is a good question that we can put on the
Yeah,
agenda and try to get some answers for next
Yeah.
meeting. I mean, from, back when we were experiencing the enrollment growth, those pre-K numbers were important to be fixed because, because they are part of our elementary school design capacity seats. Like some, there are classrooms that are used for pre-K in almost every, and when we were experiencing enrollment growth, sometimes they had to move pre-Ks out of a certain school because it was too overcrowded and
Yeah.
too many relocatables, and so there was no, that had to go, but there was room at that other school, so we put them there, and but I think now when we're looking at this, what I see as a surplus of seats, and it's not insignificant. So by 2028, the total pre-K seat surplus compared to the relative design capacity seat of 30,164 is 1,968 surplus seats for pre-K through 12. And that's using the 1,200.
That's using that number.
That's using the 1,000.
Which is the maximum.
Right. So it would maybe even more surplus seats if, and that, like with growth, it's surplus of seats does not happen evenly, across the system. Some places, as we see right now, there's a couple of schools that are overcrowded. There's a couple of schools that are already under-enrolled. And, projected to see, even when you look at the, kind of the breakdown, which you can for the next 5 years. And also at, you look at the elementary school level, by 2028, the elementary school level alone, that's the next 5 years, it's compared using those capacity utilization, the numbers that were on the capacity utilization charts, will be 1,291 surplus elementary school seats in 2028.
Like you said, those aren't spread evenly across the county.
No, they aren't.
And that, if you look at those numbers that are in that report, that projection report from January, and I think it was the pre-SIP report from June, right? And it's got all the zones and whatnot. It tells a different tale at the elementary, middle, and high school in different zones of the county that the superintendent used. And it's interesting. I think you're absolutely right that, you've got overcapacity and undercapacity across the system, and it needs a nuanced approach to move things around if you can, because no one wants to close a school. And nobody wants to try and talk about boundaries and things like that. But if you can move more seats over to an area and kind of have, I don't know how to do it, but like have a pressure relief for those overcrowded areas through whatever you guys think is a good idea. But I think there's, and going back to your point about instead of +5 from birth rate for this year for kindergarten doing +3, I think we probably have more 3-year-olds than they have seats available. Is that, if we have 1,000 people starting in kindergarten at APS, we don't have 1,000 VPK seats. We have 500 or something like that. Is that a fair statement?
Right,
mean,
not
I
everyone.
can't-
Not everybody goes to
everyone-
pre-COVID.
The .64 probably, it's much lower, so that's
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
not a good indicator. Although you
Just
could
something to point
probably
out, yeah.
look historically at the birth to preschool ratio, and you could develop another indicator. It might be .16 for
Yeah.
that or something,
Yeah.
but you could still
Totally,
do the same thing,
Yeah,
I think.
totally. I was just saying it might be.
Yeah, yeah,
And so-
yeah, you're right, it would be lower. than
So I'll
64.
talk to my colleagues in that office that does the pre-K budgeting and see if maybe someone can come and
That'd be
speak,
That'd be great.
about that.
Yeah,
Or
Thank
I
you.
was- yeah, I mean, anyway, you can,
Another
Oh,
question
sorry.
about the forecasts versus projections. Are we able to actually kind of incorporate as a fifth source of information or something, the national birth rate trends? That is obviously a forecast, not a projection, but it's kind of baked in to some degree. It's not,
So-
doesn't count immigration, but like.
So I would say that like with everything, it's always more complicated than you think. So for a lot of the trends, like how students like transition, graduate from one grade to another, looking at trends over time and overall enrollment at APS. So that's the projections, but there are some key inputs that are based off of forecasts. And that would be two key forecasts, housing and birth. And I know that Elizabeth looks at some bigger trends on that birth forecast.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if there could be a third one, which is fertility rates, which is different than births, right? Because just because a woman at 49 has a birth doesn't mean she's going to have a second.
okay.
So that we can hear.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and we covered a lot of this last time, so we kind of took our presentation at more of what's happening with demographics this time, it's not so much about the organ. So let me try and answer this fertility rate question now. So with our population forecast, we have a cohort component model that was built by RLS Demographics, one of the consultants from Community Facility Study, and he's updated it several times. I just updated it this past fall for us. And part of that model is putting in total fertility rate for Arlington, comparing it to total fertility rate, that's looked at, what do you use, the Social Security Administration and their projected total fertility rate. The total fertility rate for Arlington is much, much lower. And the Social Security Administration actually, I think, had it kind of growing maybe, or it was high. It was very high. So there was a lot of calibration with this model to make sure that we could get to births that actually happened. So that's one calibration of the model. And then moving forward,
Okay.
looking at migration and movement, right? So you have the migration movement part, but also if you have people going out and in, what ages are they? What is the fertility rates based on age?
Right.
So all that is in this cohort component model,
Okay.
and we give that to Robert for those for the projected births. I will say that it is based on our total population, right, and how that changes. And the last time that we did a forecast for the population was about 2 years ago, two years. Coming up, we're going to do another one because that total population number really does impact the births that are projected in this model. So, now we'll talk about the population trends that have happened that really show why we need to update our forecast.
So what we see today here is not based on the updated forecast with fertility.
It is.
It is based
the
on.
most recent one.
Okay, so the outcomes here and the conclusions are different than what the demographer told us all on the 2050.
So Hamilton is a wonderful demographer. Yes, I mean I think Hamilton was big picture.
Right.
We're going to talk a little bit more about Arlington.
So you're actually going to present something that's going to be different than what he presented?
Not necessarily different. I think we're just taking a different look at it.
Huh.
Well, this is different.
Well, let's see. Yeah,
Okay.
that'll be ready. All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
The numbers that you have, do you have the total number of children in Arlington? And so what percentage are going public school versus?
No, so all these figures are for enrolled students at APS. But I know that Elizabeth has some of those numbers, so that
That
broader
number, yeah, we track that. It's in the annual profile report. If you go to the education and student section, we'll tell you, right? I think it does. I'm looking, I'm like, 'cause Emily used to be on our research team, so you might have seen them last year. But I think we do track the number of students that go to public and private.
It's in their own.
So just for a rough, what was the percentage of that? Do you remember?
Really just in my mind. Is around 92, I want to say, 90%, 80?
80%, wait, go to public. Is that what you're
I
saying?
want to say 92 would, I can't.
I guess I'm
Okay, we
just
can look it,
curious.
up.
Okay, can we get that
Yeah.
information?
Yeah, it's
At
on
a
the
later,
profile.
at a later date?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if
Just
private
freak out.
schools are growing or,
They,
Oh, no. Let me see.
Pull up the profile while
Yeah,
you give
I-
your
I can-
presentation.
thank
We
you.
can,
Public and private.
Is that only private school in Arlington, or could it be if you're going to private school in, say, Alexandria or DC proper, are they tracking it by the number of children in Arlington, or only those children in Arlington who go to Arlington private schools?
Arlington residents.
Okay, so regardless of what,
Regardless if they're
Jurisdiction.
going to Alexandria, if they're going to DC, Arlington residents.
okay.
Okay, let me see.
interesting to know how that's changed.
Well,
Well, it probably changed a lot during COVID.
else do they have to do?
Page 3. So 0 is 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks for having us here tonight. I'm here with my colleague Nicole Bowling. We are the research team in CPHD. Last year we were here talking about the forecast and we provided some demographics. Right now tonight we're going to talk about population estimates, births, and migration. The agenda for tonight, we're going to start with a housing development update. So what happened over the past year. Talk about population estimates, and then go into different variables of the component of population change. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Nicole, and she's going to talk about housing.
Okay, so tonight, I just wanted to remind everybody of the two data mechanisms that we have to track development in the county. We have our development tracking database that provides us with development statistics. We follow board actions and construction permits to track all the development that is approved, then that goes under construction, eventually completed, and then demolished. So all of this is, we have quarterly and annual reports that are on our website that I'm updating, throughout the year. And then, this is all on our open data website as well, so it's accessible to the public. You can review all of this information. And our other data source is our master housing unit database. This is all of the housing in Arlington. It's by housing unit type, owner or renter occupied. Hang on, let me put another note on here. So it's at the address level or the multifamily complex level. So this is what we provide to APS annually for student enrollment projections, and has also become our basis for population estimates. This is also available online too through the county's GIS open data suite. And then to go to this slide, this is Arlington's housing stock for 2024. So right now, as of January 1st, we estimate the county has 123,706 housing units, with the majority of them being multifamily, so that's 72% on the chart, which includes apartments and condos. The single family detached makes up 22% of the housing stock, and then the single family attached is at 6%. So this captures the net new housing units. So this is over the last 10 years. So the net new housing units is 15,302 that were added to Arlington's housing stock. So the majority of these, so 97% were multifamily, 2% were single family attached, and 1% were single family detached. On this slide here, we have that, we just want to remind you too that the majority of single family detached units were replacing a demolished home. So that's important to keep in mind. And this chart shows the new, demolished, and net units going back 10 years. So on average, about 17 new net units were added to the county. So then if we look, we change here, we're looking at the multifamily, the net new housing in Arlington. So very small amounts of this were demolished on an annual basis. So on average, about 60 to 70 units. And for new construction, the average for the last 10 years was about 1,500. I feel like I'm going fast. So, okay, this slide here, these are all the units that are currently under construction in the county. So that's a little over 3,000 housing units. Of these, 60% of the multifamily that was under construction is located in the Richmond Highway corridor. So that includes the developments that are occurring at 1900 Crystal Drive, Crystal One, or Crystal Plaza One, and then Hazel National Landing. The other 32% of the units are located in the RV corridor, and that includes the 11th and Vermont residence, 1201 North Quinn Street, Roslyn Holiday Inn, the Wendy's site, and the Ballston Central United Methodist Church. Now, all of these units, they don't come in or come online at once, so we're always monitoring that through those quarterly reports that I mentioned in the beginning with the development tracking. And also, one thing we just wanted to note here is that over the last 10 years, we took a look at just the projects that have been completed. And on average, it took about 5 years from approval to completion for projects to come online.
Is that for the bigger projects?
Yeah.
5 years?
Yeah, for the
So what's for the
major, like multifamily, the major.
multifamily?
Yeah.
So this is just what's currently being done. Like right now, there's 42 accessory dwelling units in the county being.
Yeah, that are under construction, yeah.
And single family, there's 167 houses. Okay.
Yep.
Are those last two things she mentioned across the county, or are they also concentrated where the blue levels are?
No, that they're across the county, like the single
Yeah.
family.
I figured.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah.
And does under construction just mean that a building permit's been issued but no occupancy permit yet?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, once it has an occupancy permit or a CO, that's when we call it complete. And for the multifamily, it's over 50% of the COs that come in, then we consider it complete. So then it still takes a little while for it to come online, so.
Interesting.
And about how far out, are you, so if someone applies for a building permit, would it take 2 to 3 years to be finished? But
What was from under
Oh, yeah.
construction to completion, it was about, was that,
1.5 to 2 years.
okay.
and that's for multifamily?
Yeah, that's multifamily too.
So when, Robert is using projections and student generation factors, you really only have a real picture of what's coming for 2 years? Or is there any, can you see further out?
Right, so we have what's under construction now.
Right.
And then we have what is in our forecast.
Okay.
Because we build our forecast from the bottom up.
Okay.
Project-based.
Right.
So we talk with planners and have an understanding of what is likely to come first. And we put that in the forecast as well. So Robert gets a special forecast where we go and look at the, the next 10 years in the forecast.
Okay.
And we actually put an annual number with that.
Okay.
Narrow it down. Robert schedules meetings with the affordable housing folks, and we get all on their schedules and everything.
So the Goodwill site is somewhere in the special one.
Yes.
What's interesting of we're obviously focused on the projections that you just briefed us on, but there's a lot of things I'm thinking about in the county that 3,335 units from a joint perspective is concerning, not just for a public school system, but fire, police, biking, all the things that make Arlington great, I think, in my mind anyway, that are now going to have a lot more people, which is great, more the merrier, but are we looking at that is that part of your brief? I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead. Yeah.
I mean, remember Nicole said that 15,000 units came online in the last 10 years. So you're averaging 1,500 units a year.
Yeah.
I think in the fourth quarter, what did we, 1,200 units were just completed in the fourth quarter of last year.
Yeah, libraries, all the things that are a joint.
But you're getting to the next part. Who's filling these units?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Sorry.
It's the thing that was passing it back over to you.
Right. So the development part is really, really important for Robert's projections, for our forecast, because we need to understand what's changing with the built environment, how is it changing, and then how is that reflected in the population. So I'm going to go through some population estimates. Most of them are from the Census Bureau, so keep that in mind. So the blue bars here are all population estimates from the Census Bureau's Population Estimates Program, and you can see from 2012 going up to the decennial census, which is that really bright yellow line up there. It's not as bright on my screen. So I hope you guys can see it. We steadily had population increase, and then we had the pandemic, right? And then we had a decline in population. The gray bars for 2023 and 24 are our estimates that use development and also factors of average household size and occupancy rates to come up with those current estimates for 23. So we estimate that we have reached and surpassed that of the 2020 census. And again, you guys are always the first to see these numbers because they haven't come out in the profile yet. So yeah, you guys are a selected group.
We're special too.
You are very special.
Go us.
So just keep in mind that the next slides go up to the date is 2022, and that's because that's data from the Census Bureau, and they break it down by age. So this is looking at population 2020 to 2022, and I realize this is kind of difficult to really see what's going on here because it is 3 years of data. It's broken down to 5-year increments for the ages. But I wanted you guys to have this, so you have this in your records. But what we did was we also broke it down and grouped the ages to 10 years to make it a little more manageable. And you can start to see things. The 0 to 9, right? That we see a decline there. We also see a decline in the 30 to 39. And what we realized is that, those 0 to 9, they're not getting in their car and leaving by themselves, right? They have parents. So it's probably that 30 to 39 age range is really corresponding with that 0 to 9. And that's, 30, 39, that's the high time for, fertility rates for women. That's the peak age range. So that's one hint of what's going on. You have probably families that are leaving. So that's your first hint right there. We also see areas that we have increases, the 10 to 19. Really kind of, to me, I saw something in the 50 to 59. Well, what's happening there? It's probably folks that are a little more grounded in Arlington, a little more invested. They might not be as willing to get up and go. They have kids that are in middle and high school, so they're probably staying here. So that 10 to 19 really look close to the 50 to 59. I'm not saying that they're 100% correlated, just pointing that out.
And that's because overall the fertility here is delayed because it's not, I think the average is still in the 20s nationwide, but
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in the 30s here, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, pointing that out, the 0 to 9, another one, look at 30 to 39, and then we have those 70 plus, which we're really seeing increases as well. So, we thought, how do we know what's going on? This is 2020 and 2022. Does this make a trend? What is happening? How much has been impacted by the pandemic? So we thought, let's take a step back and look at a little bit more data going back, just a little bit more. And we thought, let's start at 2012, do 12, 17, and 22. Those are 5-year increments. You can see this is the 5-year data for 2012. One thing to note here is to think about where we were in 2012. We were coming out of the recession. During the recession, Arlington was a place to weather the storm. Actually, this region was. A lot of people moved here. 2012 millennials, the oldest age group, which is turning 30, 31. I know that for a fact. And, so they were moving here. This was a great place to get a job. And, but did they stay, right? Could they stay? Could they afford to stay? And I think we'll start seeing that with the data in 2017, see a little bit of changes, and then 2022. So we're gonna look at this a couple different ways, just so we can see it differently. Here's the age sex pyramids for 12, 17, and 22. What's interesting about 12, it's almost like we have 2 triangles, right? So we have that really big one. Let me see if I can get a pointer. Does this do it? Oh yeah, it does. So we have this big one here, right? And then we have this here is almost like another one. And so we have that big, the 25 to 29 coming out. And then you can see in 17, it comes in, right? So we don't have that big age group. The smaller triangle is still kind of there. But as you look at 2022, it comes in a little bit more, aligned, And look at this here. We're not really seeing that triangular shape anymore. So just another visualization. I overlaid it, so it might be just another way to look at it. And see a change, to see where the population is. What's interesting in that 25 to 29, the male side increases. You can see the male side increase more than the female. I don't know why that is.
Huh.
But
Wait, increase from 2012 to 2017 or?
from this one, 17 to 2022. So we're going to change it. Let me go the other way. So when we go this way, so that's just another way to look at it. Going back to looking at the 10-year groups for ages. Again, we can see 0 to 9 as that kind of peak in 17, then down. 30 to 39 is really the only other one that has that same kind of look at the bars. So they could be connected. Same with the 10 to 19, 40 to 49, you know, and 50 to 59. Just thinking, those might be the parents. The 20 to 29, it's come down. But it's really, you know, it's a tiny bit higher than it was in 2017. Then you get to the seniors, and that's just continued to grow.
Yeah.
So what's your read on all of this? I mean, in terms of, because it seems to me, it seems so, sort of explainable in terms of the age groups and everything else. It just, you have young people coming in, we have, you know, folks who are going out and traveling and, you know, for work or for whatever. I mean, I'm just wondering what your.
How about, going to maybe look the question wall?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have a breakdown of school-age kids to, households that have school-age kids and households that don't?
That's in the profile as well.
Okay.
Okay, so going to the next one. So now we're going to talk about components of change, talk about how the population changes. Births, migration are the things that increase the population. Deaths and out-migration are the things that decrease the population. So we'll start with births. This is a national birth trend from going back to 2007, looking at how things have changed. So starting at 2007, if you compare each year of births with that 2007, this is how it's changed. And we haven't reached 2007 levels. Continue to, these are all, as you notice, the top bar here is 0. So these are all negative. Which is interesting, the Northeast at the time after the recession was, I guess, the lowest negative. And now it's the South. Okay, then we go, looked at Virginia. So Northern Virginia was the outlier here, you know, the closest to 0. And then starting in 2017, started to go down. And now the Richmond area is the lowest negative in the state. And then let's look at Arlington. So Arlington was actually positive. And it was up to 2016 and then started to decline.
In an article by Hamilton Lombard, he cited that Arlington dropped 25% birth rate. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And then this is the same thing that Robert showed, just as a line chart.
Do you track that over many more decades because of the whole generational change in housing? Like if there was expansion in the 50s and then those people are deceased by 2010 or whatever, and then everyone came in because there was a generational turnover in the housing stock. Do you track that or?
We don't go back that far. I don't even know if we would be able to get the data to go back that far.
I mean, you could, well, I hear that was a factor in some of this.
Affordability too.
Definitely with the millennials and that big population as well. It's because
or just
we're here, you know, and we have the next age group when that comes through, we're going to have more births from them as well. But there are dips.
It's like when Broyhill built, you know, 20,000 or something in 1 year, then by 100 years, all those people are deceased, or, you know, by 50 years, whatever that is. And so that generational turnover of housing stock. And I thought that someone was saying that was a factor around the 2010s of people being able to come in and then, hey, I've got a house. But that's not going to happen necessarily 10 years from now.
Right.
Because those people are not dead yet.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that would go into them being able to purchase a house in their early 30s and stay because, you know, supply and then affordability.
Just that we know what evacuates houses, which is death. So that's the point of
deaths or retirement
Yeah,
pandemics
right.
that caused
No.
people to go out.
So,
Yeah.
so
The
as
cost
we're
to
getting
live
off
here.
that morbid subject,
Yeah.
so prior to 2020, deaths averaged around 900 per year. 2021 and 22 goes up to 1,200 per year. I really think it's because of COVID, and then we also have an increasing senior population. So more people in the senior population probably means more deaths. Okay, now we're going to talk about migration, which is always a fun topic because it is the hardest variable to get a handle on. This chart shows the international and domestic migration, also the net migration. So you can see, the impact from the pandemic. We had a lot of folks leave, and then or net out migration, and we still have a little bit of a net out migration, but it's not to that level it was during the pandemic. And where did folks move? So this is actually the latest data from the IRS, 2022 data that doesn't come out until June. But this looks at, pre-pandemic, what were the top 20 locations that Arlingtonians were moving to? So you have that as your first column there, 1 to 20, and then in 2019 to 2020, how did that change? And you can start to see some places move up and move down on the list. We have new places like Baltimore City and Wake County, North Carolina, start to get on the charts. And other ones fall off. And then 20 to 21, you can see even more how Anne Arundel County moved up to 8, and Richmond City moved up to 12. So the first 7 are always the same, regardless. But it seems like folks are moving south, if not to Richmond, then they're moving to North Carolina. Okay, so this goes into, I think, Natalie, some of your who's moving in, who's moving out, what's happening. Looking at the movement by age again, just looking at 18, 19, there's no one-year data for 2020. The Census Bureau did not publish that. So then looking at 21 and 22, we look at the one-year data for 2018. This shows net movement by age. You can see that those 20 to 24, they're still coming in. They are still coming in Arlington. We are attracting them. And the 5 to 17, goes up a little bit too. But as we move along, we can see the 5 to 17 in 2019 started to move out, and so did the 30-year range, or the 35 to 49. This is the 2021, and then 2022, the net movement by age. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's the same. So that net movement is the yellow line here, and it just shows the migration by age. So you can see the under 18 is negative, young professionals, probably it's still positive there, but then goes negative again, positive again, it kind of hovers around that 0. So again, what does this mean, right? So thinking about this means like, we have all these housing units being built, but they're mostly multifamily, probably 1 to 2 bedroom units, right? How many folks can they hold in them, or how many folks will they hold? And so that talks about average household size. Talking about single family homes and what's happening there, who's moving out, are people staying in their homes at, when they're empty nesters? Can they sell their home? What's happening with the market? And this is kind of telling on this chart where we're looking at the difference between non-family and family households. And if we look since the 2020 census, we've actually had a decline in family households. So a family household means people related living together. Non-family means that they're not related. They're either this one-person household, or they're roommates, or that kind of situation. So looking at from 2020 to 2022, we have had a decline in the family households. So right there, we've lost families. And the last time that's really happened was in the 70s, according to this chart.
70s.
70s. And that's, when we saw that population decline in Arlington is because we're having that household structure shift. We're having a shift from, we're seeing families move out, and yes, families are moving in, but probably not at the same rate. And where we're growing is in the multifamily housing, which has lower household sizes. So if we look at our average household size, it's down to 2.05, which is, similar to what it was in 1980, 2.07, 2010. So key takeaways, housing stock is growing, majority of multifamily units are the ones that are being developed. In 2021, we had resulted from the pandemic, we did see young professionals and family move out. However, we are seeing young professionals move back in, but it's a different dynamic, it's a different household structure. We're not always seeing families move back in. And average household size continues to decline. Now, in next month, the Census Bureau will be releasing the 2023 data, so we'll have new numbers. We'll have the 2023 estimates. Hopefully, they're somewhat close to our population estimates that we were putting out. Weldon Cooper, I would have to say Weldon Cooper Center and the projections that Hamilton works on are actually higher than our estimate for Arlington. So I think they're 242, something around that, and ours is 240. So he's a little higher than us.
For next year.
No, sorry, for 2023, but for
Okay.
Population estimate. Yeah, so we continue to monitor. I mean, we're fascinated by what's going on right now. We want to really understand what's happening. We're trying to use all the data and resources. Robert and I are always sending each other articles and data. Have you seen this? Seen this article, what's happening here. So we're constantly talking about this, constantly trying to get a handle on what is happening and how we can provide that information to you all. So that I guess will. Natalie, I hope I answered your question about.
You did.
Okay, great.
I mean, it's interesting.
Thank you.
I think it was a Weldon Cooper Hamilton article about Virginia and about Northern Virginia, and he said, where he said that Fairfax County lost population for the first time ever last year.
Wow.
Yeah, and at the Arlington 2050 event, he attributed a lot of the outmigration to remote work and kind of this new
Landscape,
this new
work landscape.
generation, this new landscape that allows people to live in an affordable place out and not have to commute
Right.
2 hours into work.
Do you have the same data for other jurisdictions, like average, all of this, could you compare it to DC, and Montgomery, and to Fairfax?
Yeah, so most of it is census data, and yes, it is.
Are we wildly different, or are we similar to?
I haven't done the comparison yet.
That would be interesting to see if we're similar to BC for Alexandria.
How do you synthesize then your presentation with Robert's presentation? I don't see them meshing.
What, Claire?
Well, I mean,
So-
How do you synthesize the two presentations?
So so Elizabeth didn't touch on that's population forecast.
Right, because I didn't talk about that this time because I thought we were just giving demographic update, but I can bring the population forecast up if that's something that you all would like to see.
Well,
That's
I
fine.
mean, but you did say that families with children are moving out.
Right, so,
And so how is there gonna be growth?
so based on the data that we get from Census Bureau, that's all going to go into our forecast that we produce. And understanding, what is the average household size that we apply to all of the occupied housing units in the county? Should that be changed as we go along with the forecast? So this data and understanding all of these elements help us to produce a forecast that then is given, used to create the
Like student generation ratio?
the birth projection,
Oh,
like our projected births, and then we give it to Robert.
Yeah, I think the connection between our work is, so for the projections, a lot of data is about our students, how our student population has changed over time. But there's two key components that go in that are not a projection, they're a forecast that come from the county. So the birth forecast, Elizabeth uses the CPHD household and population forecast as one of the things that informs that birth forecast. But I think one of the things, the reason why the current projections have that upward slope this fall versus last fall is a change to the birth forecast. Part of it is in the background, there's an expectation of the county's population continuing to grow. And there's always been a bulge in the population pyramid in that population, that's associated with those higher fertility rates. In that birth forecast, there's an assumption that that bulge will continue to grow at some of those key ages for the female population of some of the higher fertility rates, and that bulge will then, will move upwards in terms of age. And so the net result of that is that the birth's increasing, because as the population forecast is increasing and some of that bulge continues to increase, there's an expectation that some of that female population will continue residing in the county. Mm-hmm. And you were right that some of the higher fertility rates are at some of the older population, females. And so that's where that shift occurred.
So the 25 to 29 Christmas tree, the idea is they will end up being into that 30 to 35 and start producing the 0 to 5. And but we did notice, I think what you were showing is that they don't stay here when they do necessarily. And so how is that ever going to be put into an APS document?
How are you on our team?
Well, and the other thing I wanted to say, Robert, is that it seems like the projection report that you produce is more appropriate for for HR, for example. I mean, because it's that sort of trend, and it's, you can make hiring decisions about teachers in classrooms over the 3 to 5 year range. But to use it for capital planning strikes me as a little bit concerning.
Well, that's why I say that.
And we need that forecast to be developed, not a projection, but an actual forecast. And I don't know that we're doing it for.
So that's why, I started the presentation saying at some of those outer years, 5 years out, use some degree of caution because it is so dependent, especially at the elementary level, on that birth forecast. Now, the thing with the birth, so projections are updated every year with some of the enrollment changes as they're occurring. The same thing with some of the on the county side for that birth forecast. So the updated population forecast will factor in some of the updated census numbers in terms of migration, and average household sizes will factor in. So it's always changing, but sometimes to catch up to more current circumstances, you need more data is lagging, in other words. But that's why we're updating all this information every year.
But I worry that without doing 2 reports, a projection and a forecast, one is misleading in decisions. I think it's misleading. I worry about that. Because the 10-year, what I'm hearing tonight, the 10-year forecast is different than the 10-year projections.
I think they're the same. Yeah,
I'm
it's just
hearing it's different.
they're shown in different ways. Like what I took from the difference in presentations is they're different sides of the same coin, where one is focused just on children and APS projections for that aspect, whereas they're had more of a here's where housing's changing, here's how it's affecting the entire county infrastructure, where things are happening, where the growth is occurring, which I've personally found fascinating. To your point, though, I think we should have like a better idea of forecasting for growth or flatline or whatever we are saying APS is doing in the next 5 years. And the last thing we have is the pre-SIP report from June, right? Like that, we're waiting for the next.
Well,
So-
what I'm hearing
Right.
that's different though is that a 30-year-old with a newborn 5 years ago stayed put, and a
Right.
30-year-old with a newborn today is leaving.
Most
And that
on a trend.
creates a difference between the trend line
Totally.
and the
Yeah.
forecast. So
But-
that's why I'm still hearing that
but-
there's a difference.
But so I think part of what you're seeing is that our presentations were very different.
Okay.
So my presentation was on projections, on
Yeah.
what we expect in the future. Elizabeth and Nicole's presentation was about sort of some figures from the near past and what we're currently experiencing, but nothing about the forecast. So if you see
Right.
the population and household forecast, you'll see how it interplays with our projections, with the
Okay.
APS projections, because one of the assumptions that's brought out of the population household forecast is assumptions both of new housing construction and the type of housing construction and where it's going to occur, but also extracted from that population forecast is the expectation on future births. And that future births also brings into account
And that's,
in and out migration, that the population pyramid and changing population pyramid over time.
okay.
So that's the relationship, and that's why we cooperate on the data, because that sort of cooperation didn't always exist until the community facility studies. So there was a very conscious effort that with the community facility studies that Matt Glad was involved with, that there would be more of a relationship so that what the county's seeing also informs what APS is seeing. So that's the difference.
I think, yeah, so what you're presenting, you're actually expecting things to change.
These are always changed.
Well-
That's the only constant.
What I'm saying is, really don't know exactly how it's going to change. This is what we have seen, right? And the best that we can do is use what we have seen the past 10 years, the past 3 years, is to put that into our forecast, that we provide the data to Robert and APS. So, part of the idea tonight is to give you all that background on what is happening with the population, what has been happening with the population. So when Robert comes with his forecast, for next year, it will, you'll see like, oh, well, maybe that's a result of the house.
Yeah. So as as Elizabeth and her team update their population household forecast, it's also gonna it'll ripple through a lot of other things like the birth forecast that's aligned to the population forecast. That also informs the enrollment projections. So it's not like we're in silos, we're working together. It's just the nature of the presentations were different.
I think we need to go back to one of our old graphics about how this all works together with the arrows and everything.
I think last year.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Right, last year in February, the same group was here in
Yeah.
the same room.
Yeah.
Right, and you went into more of a deeper dive on these
Yeah.
topics. So I'd encourage everybody to go to the February 2023 JFAC meeting. And, I think the idea here was not reinvent the wheel, because most of you were here then.
Yeah.
Probably didn't want to hear the same information.
And so is
I like this brief. I mean,
Is
it's
that,
definitely awesome.
like the Arlington County projections, that's what you have that we saw last year, that's what's most current right now.
That's correct.
Okay, and I just want to also kind of to Claire's point, I mean, I think, first of all, I think you guys have, the projections work you guys have done since the community facility study is really to be commended. You know, I think that it is as accurate. It's based on the best information that you have at hand. You guys work together. It's housing forecast, and you know, I you know, well done. Thank you for that. I think, you know, for me, looking at this report, and especially coming in, you know, having my experience working with facilities, you know, APS facilities has been coming in when we were seeing 750 kids enter the school system every year. We were, you know, we had high birth rates, we had high people moving in. I was one of those families. My son, who's now in college, was a 2010 kindergartner, and you know, went through the whole system. My daughter, she was a 2012 kindergartner. So you know, we've been through that system, and now it's a different environment at APS, and it's, you know, it's hard looking at this report, especially after looking at the, you know, capacity utilization charts and the graphs in the pre-CIP report that show it relative to capacity. And this talks about growth. You have the population, you know, it took me a while to kind of look through it. I had to do some numbers and compare, and it actually, the decline, especially at the elementary school level, the surplus of seats actually increases between now and 2028.
Not everywhere. It's all over.
Well,
right.
you know, school-wide, and there are some schools that were under capacity that become more under capacity, and it's not just in one part of the county.
But it's not linear, absolutely.
It's everywhere. I mean, there's school. You know, by my calculations, there were 8 schools, 2028, 8 elementary schools that would be operating at 80% capacity or less. You know, one of them was Drew, and it's at 65%. You know, there was Nottingham, Long Branch. So they're not, you know, they're not just located in one area. They are in different places around the county. And I mean, and that was just doing some basic math. But like that, I think, is a picture that's really important in the context of like capital improvement plan and budgeting, and also, you know, teacher staffing and, you know, kind of, you know, operation budget kind of things. And I saw a graph recently that showed, you know, the Arlington County population increasing, but the school-age kids population is decreasing. And, you know, the question was asked, it was a budget advisory committee slide from a presentation they gave last year that said, you know, should you know, from a JFAC point of view, that, you know, should then we start thinking about, you know, facilities, you know, public facilities for the different age population, like for the aging population, or libraries, or, you know, single
yeah, whatever.
students. Anyway, I think it's an interesting thing, and there's always, at least with the projections, there's always been uncertainty in the out years, and it's just what you sort of, to give you a guide. It's like the former JFAC chair Greg Greeley used to call it, like the hurricane's coming, and here's the path. Here's the path that you need to plan for, and it kind of gives you the very broad path. And as you get closer and closer, or you know, as the forecast comes closer towards you, less far away, it gets more specific. And I think that which is why Arlington County and APS does a CIP every 2 years, so that we can respond to that forecast. Anyway,
Is there a plan to do similar data for DC, Montgomery County, Alexandria, Fairfax? Or is that a special request situation?
The monitor for Virginia Regional Commission, she puts out a lot of data. She has a lot of dashboards on their website. She lives in Northern Virginia, so that we can share that with you all. That's helpful. And I don't think COG does much of that, do they? Yeah. But the Northern Virginia Regional Commission does put a lot of stuff out.
Elizabeth, a couple of quick questions. Do you have any granularity on the household size? So, average household size declining, one might think maybe because multifamily housing units are increasing. I don't know if that's true, but are average household sizes declining in the single family neighborhoods as well? Do you break that down, granularity? And then the second question would be, any comments on, do you see any effects of Amazon in terms of what we're seeing with growth, jobs, age groups, locations, et cetera?
So I did have one slide in the back pocket about, so let me see if I can project.
That Amazon question,
I noticed all those blue dots in the Richmond corridor, AKA walkable to Amazon headquarters.
I think
Yes.
it's really hard
Well,
to
maybe
Nice
say,
place.
tell
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
minus 4 years.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah.
That's the point.
maybe change. What are the
I-
chips long
I love the area. I welcome all this change, but yeah, where would we put these
Let me
people?
just share my screen to see if we can do it that way. Can you see this one?
Oh.
So this is looking at a couple different data sources from the ACS. I'm just looking at household size. The top line, the pink one is single family, the yellow one is total, and then multifamily is the blue one. And it's just looking at 1 year estimates going back to 2016. So, we have seen a decline, a little bit up and down here. 2019, even before the pandemic, it looks like average household size for a single family went down a little bit.
Not much.
It looks like
It's like 2.7 to 2.6, 2.8, right? Is that what I
2.8, actually 2.8 to like 2.6,
Yeah.
18 and 19. That's actually a really big jump, apparently.
I'm sure.
Average household size, like it's, to see any change.
But now it's 2.85,
Yeah, it's back
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Back up.
which is probably why.
But this is 1 year data, and it can be, there can be margin of errors in
Oh,
this
thanks.
data and stuff. So I think of it as like the overall trend for this and how it relates to each other is probably the best way to look at this.
Clearly, the multifamily is dragging the number down.
Yeah, because the stock is increasing so much.
I just had a question about the single-family homes. This is kind of unrelated, but where are these new single-family detached homes that are not demolished homes? Where are they being built? Like, what part of Arlington is that? I don't see like 1 square foot of real estate here that is. Where's
So
this happening?
in East Falls Church, for
It's
example,
not
so my
going up.
neighborhood, there are some new single-family developments where there was kind of a large plot of land that got subdivided and then turned into single-family homes. There's also the Fabry Northrop site, which is, I think,
The what?
converted.
The what?
The February Northrop site near Madison Manor, that's, had the old
Oh.
historic home on the hill.
Yeah, right.
Now
No,
that's
but those are
house
big,
3 or
those
4,
are just
right.
big.
40 houses where one was.
So they're
Oh,
not,
okay.
yeah, so they sort of happen in chunks when you have a
But you're
single-family
asking
development.
attached
But you're right,
homes,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, but they're 40
Single-family
detached.
detached.
They're
Yeah.
single-family
Detached.
detached.
I just
Yeah,
haven't
they're
seen
so really-
anything that doesn't look like it was something. This is just curiosity, has nothing to do with this. But
I-
so is that you say East Falls Church, and then where is this Madison?
It's close by there.
Was by,
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we're talking about 17 a year in a
Yeah.
28,000, I mean.
Yeah,
it's gonna be
something
very steep. But to talk about to Amazon, I think Amazon, for our forecast, if we did not have Amazon in our forecast, our office jobs would have declined more substantially than they did. So in our forecast, we looked at the vacancy rate at the time we produced it. So again, that was 2022. So we used the vacancy rates then. And then we normalized it over a 10-year period, or normalize it over the, sorry, getting tired, guys. Normalize it to 2050 for a 10-year average, and which were still really high vacancy rates for office. And I think, you know, the farther out you go in the forecast, which reliability or accuracy is going to be questionable. I think it's more of a rosy picture probably than what it will be for the office jobs. But again, we're going to take a look at it this summer.
Do we correlate any income with any of this household income?
We don't correlate.
I have one question about whether, Robert, you give information back to them in terms of student generation rates for housing. My other people have given me the impression that even though you would think a one-bedroom apartment in the Orange Line corridor would not generate a high number of students, that it actually does. And maybe people are more incentivized to, you know, rent the amount of housing that they can afford, even if it's not a bedroom per kid here in Arlington, to take advantage of the really good school system, which means do our apartments have a higher student generation ratio than maybe the average? And I think APS could actually trace that back. You guys know where every single student lives.
Well, you'll produce student generation factors.
But I don't know if you produce it based on local data or if they just use national data is what I'm.
No, so we work together on that. So Nicole mentioned the master housing unit database. So Nicole, you know, like Nicole and Elizabeth, they keep track of every single residential parcel.
Okay.
So they give that file to me.
Okay.
Every year they update it because every year the parcels are changing.
Okay, so it's a
so,
locally derived
yeah,
student generation.
So what I do is
that's good.
I match all the students from September 30th to the parcels. So then on the report, there's a student generation rates page.
Yeah.
So that one, you know, we try to like footnote, it's sourced and footnoted so that you know the year that the parcel file, the parcel files from and when the student counts are from. I'm gonna be updating that this spring. But also as the county has projects that are going before the planning commission, the county will send APS a list, you know, like the proposed information on the proposed project, the number of units. For a lot of the new mixed income, how many of them are like market rate and how many are committed affordable, and then APS provides.
So you guys do it.
Yeah, so okay, it's a two-way kind of flow of information.
Okay, that's helpful.
And also Robert provided all the data in the profile from APS, so I put up what the student generations are for the different unit type for breakout. And that's the same that Robert has in his report. Robert's report also has it by attendance area, which is pretty neat to see as well.
What report? Which one?
It's the enrollment projections report. So this was
came out in January.
Yeah.
The report at 8.
And so that's probably one of the more popular parts of the report is the student generation rates table.
Awesome, thank you.
And I will share, knowing that it's close to 9 o'clock. Do you have public comment?
There were some people that were dialed in. If we
Is there anybody still, participating virtually?
could ask.
Does anyone online want to give public comment? It's *6 to unmute. No one's unmuting.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Matt. But I will share the Arlington 2050 info that I talked about at the beginning of the meeting. I will share the link to Robert's projections report that came out in January. And if you guys could send me a link maybe to if there's last year's presentation or and this year's presentation too. That would be great. I can send that out. And I was also going to share the, there's an article that Hamilton Lombard wrote about Virginia, kind of the trends of school enrollment in Virginia that I think is fairly interesting. And it talks about, sort of, it just puts it into a larger context. And
Then could we get the follow-up on the pre-K?
yes, and at our March meeting,
Maximum.
we haven't set the agenda yet, but, you know, we will be talking, yeah, but
Or if you can
I'll-
just.
the plan was-
talk to-
Whatever, I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
have
I'll
to
see if I
be-
can get someone who can talk about it, you know,
Yeah.
who worked on that.
yeah,
Email it around.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
we'll talk about, yeah, we'll try to have those answers in March, and we'll sort of talk about kind of these things in sort of context.
I think the proposed budget will be up by March for APS, right?
It's going to be out tomorrow.
Yes, the superintendent's proposed budget, yeah.
Yeah, so, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
I know what you do.
You have the cookies, Stacy, you're on it.
I know.